Tonight we're here for the screening of an original film. Mr. Sam Ebersol from Colorado State University was the director, and he is here tonight. Sam? Oh, there he is. Okay, thank you very much. I am Mike Fink. I am your moderator tonight. I'm also your voting member for the El Paso County seat at the Arkansas Basin Roundtable. The Roundtable was a funder for this effort, and it's really, really good. If you were here 3 years ago for The Great Divide, this is as good a film as that, although it focuses on the river that we live in the basin, in the Arkansas Basin. So let's start now. Please stick around a little bit. We'll have a panel of water experts afterwards. Promise to keep it short, but let's watch the film now. So I'd like the 6 people on the panel to come down here. As they're coming down here, let me just set the stage for you. We have 6 different people who have 6 different positions in the water world, all the way from water managers to water regulators, and we also have an elected official here. Your name is on the question. Rather than asking everybody on the panel the same question, I've tried to craft a series of questions, one for each member, that most basically affects some of the things that they do and that they can bring to this. You saw an overall view of the Arkansas River, then you saw several different areas within the Arkansas River, and they did spend some time on Fountain Creek, and that's where we are now. So I'm not going to read everybody's resume. What I will do before I ask them the question, though, is read their title, which should give you an idea of what they do and where they're coming from. So initially, Larry Small is the executive director of the Fountain Creek Watershed Flood Control and Greenway District. Now, to activate your microphones, I think you have to press a button. So, is that right? Good. Larry, the district has a finite amount of funding, and the funding that you have now will evaporate in 2 years?
No.
Well, it will. The major part of the funding will go away. What is your planning for consistent and reliable funding for the district?
Okay, thank you, Mike. I think we have 2 pots of money, actually, so you're right about the one pot. We have funding for the district's operation and projects, and then we create a water activity enterprise that has enterprise funding. So the enterprise funding is fairly stable for about 10 years, and that was funded through the SDS contribution of the $50 million. So that's specific money to be used for a specific purpose in a specific area. So we don't have much latitude over what we do with that money. The district's money, when the legislature created the district, they gave us an authorization to fund the district in a number of different ways. One, we can charge for services. We've done that in the past. That's part of the money we've raised over the 9 years to fund the district's operation and projects. We can charge for use of facilities. Well, at this point in time, the district has no facilities that we could assess a fee for use on. An example of that might be a reservoir where we might have a fee associated with storage from the storage folks who have the water that they want to keep somewhere. But we right now we don't have any things that we can charge a use fee on. The other thing the district allowed us to do was create special districts within the watershed management area, but those are special districts for specific purposes for a community within that area. So those funds have to be authorized by the voters in that district that's created and then used for that purpose. and the district would receive part of the funds for the operation of the district. The other thing the legislature provided was really the significant revenue for the district. And they said in the statute that the district could charge up to a 5 mil property tax across the entire district to fund the district. Now, the district boundaries are all of El Paso County and Pueblo County. So if you looked at 5 mills at the current assessed valuation of the two counties, that would raise, 5 mills would raise between $38 and $40 million a year. So we looked at that and said, well, that's not what we really need to operate a district, and we did some analysis on a range of mill levies from a half mil all the way up to 5 mills and a half mil increments, and we concluded at 2 mills, which would produce about $16 to $18 million a year, would be the value that we would need to have a sustainable and productive district. And looking at residential property, for instance, of a $250,000 home, that would amount to roughly $30 to $38 a year in that range. So that's how the district is authorized to be funded. However, that mill levy has to be approved by the voters, subject to the requirements of Tabor. So we would have to have a coordinated election in El Paso County and Pueblo County concurrently with the voters approving the question as to the mill levy. And the majority would determine the outcome of that election, and the majority would be the total of the for votes and against votes cast in those counties. It wouldn't be county by county. So that's how we can fund the district. We have looked at it, and our board's looked at it seriously ever since we were created. We're completing our 9th year now. And we looked at different times, when would there be a good time to ask the question? And there was so much things going on within El Paso County, primarily associated with the loss of the stormwater enterprise and other issues that came up, and how do we fund that, and do we need a regional authority for funding? So we said we're just not going to get in the way of those questions. We're going to let that be resolved in El Paso County and Colorado Springs. Then once that gets resolved, then we can assess how we fit into that scheme. So Richard is going to talk about, I think, how that problem has been solved in Colorado Springs. And our last discussion on this issue was that we would look forward to 2020 as the year that we could bring a ballot question forward on this issue. Now, we have a lot of work to do. You just don't throw something on the ballot and say, when you get the ballot, you'll be surprised to see what you have there to vote on. You have to involve people in that process. So we have a plan to start next year with the funding that we'll have available to start reaching out to people and telling them what the district's all about. We've gotten a lot of good recognition over these 9 years. We're becoming better and better known each year, but we're still pretty much of a secret in the two counties, so we need to let people know that our mission is, of course, flood control, but greenways, trails, wetlands, riparian habitats, wildlife habitats, those are all within the charter of the district to implement and support and sustain within the district. So those are the things that we're involved in. We just have to let people know the benefit they receive from having the district. We've been pretty successful just kind of say scrounging around for money, but we've done that. We've been very successful in it. We've raised over that 9-year period roughly $17 million just here and there through partnerships and other arrangements we have through grants that we receive from the state and other funding sources. So it's just like kind of running a business. You have to find your revenue. You have to have a plan for the use of revenue, and you have to be able to figure out how to sustain it. So right now, we're a government agency being run like a small business. Hopefully, we're going to grow. We're doing more and more each year. We're getting better and better at what we do, and we're providing far more services than we thought was going to be possible with the resources we have. So I think that may be a long question long answer to your question, but within the district, we do have in the bank about $200,000 this time, and within the water activity enterprise, we have about $17 million in the bank at this time. So that part is okay, but as I said, those monies are to be used specifically for compliance with Pueblo County's 1041 permit under the agreement made between Colorado Springs Utilities and Pueblo County. We're simply the caretaker and user of that funds on behalf of the objectives that were set forth in that permit.
Thank you, Larry. Rich Mulledy is the manager of the City of Colorado Springs Water Resource Engineering Division. And you saw the congratulations for issue 2A that established a dedicated funding resource for stormwater projects. What are your division's goals, other than the projects list, that address Fountain Creek's wildly differing flow conditions? It seems like we either have a small trickle or a raging flood.
Sure. Well, thank you. First of all, that was a really great video. I mean, it was wonderful, and it was very well done. I think it was a humbling video to watch. I really want one of those electric shock devices for fishing. Where do I get one of those? If you could help me get one of those, that'd make me a much better fisherman, because I'm not that great. Well, let me first start with the city of Colorado Springs is no different than the other city. It's a very old city, started developing 100 years ago, or, maybe a little more. We really didn't have, a stormwater criteria or even flood control type criteria anywhere until about the 1950s, 60s. People didn't even really start thinking about that. Then you go even to in the 1970s, 80s, you started to have criteria, but it was flood control based. So it was really looking at large events like the 10-year and the 100-year event. So nowadays, we think about that a lot differently. We have full spectrum detention. We try to address all the different flows, 2-year, 5-year, 10-year, different flows to try and match natural hydrology of developed areas. And we're doing that. But that is a relatively young science. I mean, we're talking really the last decade or two. So you're stuck with a huge area of the city that either was developed with no detention, any kind of detention systems, or flood-based detention systems. And that's why you see, you can see large flashes in different events, right? So how do we address that? Well, I think, first of all, the stormwater funding is just a critical, vital thing. It creates a dedicated division and enterprise, okay? So what we can do with that money is we can have dedicated review staff, we can have dedicated engineering staff that ensure that the criteria that we have is followed, right? Anything that's new that is developed in our city has full spectrum detention, has conveyance or has detention schemes and infrastructure that helps to even those flows out in the downstream reaches. And we are doing that, but you're still stuck with the other areas that were developed in different times. The other thing that the funding allows us to do is to study our city, begin to study our city in a long-term way and implement programs that are long-term, okay, without the ups and downs of funding. And in the past, you may start something, but then funding drops, things like that. What we're doing now, we've been working on it for about a year. Few people know about it because it's really an internal project. It's called the Stormwater Infrastructure Master Plan. And it's called the SIMP. I did not make up the SIMP, but that's what it's called. What it is a study of our entire city and every basin in it, and then the surrounding areas, different cities, different counties. And it's a study basin by basin of our infrastructure and its needs. And it will look at detention and detention possibilities in each basin We are well down that road. Like I said, we've been working on it for about a year. It's cost us a lot of money. It's a very robust system, a really very robust study. What we will do with that study is then identify areas that we can go back in and build detention facilities and other facilities, wetlands, other types of permanent BMPs to help level out flows in those areas and get it back to a full spectrum detention type scheme. So that was a kind of long-winded engineering answer, but the simple answer to that is ensuring that development happens the way that it's supposed to according to our criteria, and then studying our city and finding where those large flashes are coming from in different events and building infrastructure to handle it.
Thanks, Rich. And for you who don't speak water, BMPs are best management practices.
Yeah.
We have our own language.
That is true.
Doug Hollister is the District 10 Water Commissioner for Division 2, the Division of Water Resources, the Department of Natural Resources. Doug, other than me, you're probably the least known person up here on the panel to this audience. However, your role in administering the water rights in the Fountain Creek is amazingly complex. As we move deeper into the 21st century, give us some insight on how the computer tools have increased your efficiency and precision in administering water in the Fountain Creek.
Other than not getting the memo on needing a shirt and tie. I've been with the Division of Water Resources about 10 years, and I can say that technology has grown in leaps and bounds since my starting with Division of Water Resources. Most of the decreed augmentation plans in the entire Arkansas River Basin are in District 10. We have a lot of water that is either reusable or is covering depletions for native water that needs to be replaced to other downstream water users that are senior, and we utilize computer tools daily. As a matter of fact, I just got a brand new computer today. I hate setting up a new computer, but I got one today. So as part of the increase or the insight in the computer tools that we use, with this reusable water, we have to be able to shepherd it past water rights, shepherd it to a certain point or to a certain area to another use. And one of the main aspects, or one of the programs that has been developed on Fountain Creek, which is unique to the entire state, is the USGS Fountain Creek Transit Loss Accounting Program, based on some modeling of aquifer characteristics and stream flows. Any entity that has reusable return flows in Fountain Creek has the ability to track that to a very specific spot, either on Fountain Creek or to the confluence of the Arkansas. And using that tool is phenomenal. We're able to show a well augmentation plan that needs to have a certain amount of acre feet each month. We can able to show a replacement supply to that point in the stream to cover the amount of water that is being consumed in that plan, and ensuring that senior water right holders are kept whole as part of their augmentation plans. One of the other aspects that Division of Water Resources as a whole statewide is developing is better access to data. It seems as if our annual publishing of diversion records wasn't good enough for a lot of our water users who needs instantaneous data. So as part of our initiative, we've now provisionally published data that users can use in their modeling programs for forecasting possibly changes in augmentation plans or other types of water court filings. We're able to map it on a map, and you can pull up a structure ID with historic diversion records on that specific structure on your cell phone. I mean, it's phenomenal how much data just in the past year has been made public. And it seems as if we can never have enough stream gauges. Even though on Fountain Creek we have probably the most in the entire Arkansas River Basin, with the exception of some hog plants in the lower basin now. We have so many stream gauges that the Fountain Creek Transit Loss Program requires for its quantifications. So, finding that some of our more seasoned water commissioners aren't as versed in some of our technology advances, but they're actually coming around to it. I've been trying to convince them that you don't need to hand enter data when you can use tools to make it more efficient. So that's one of the aspects that in my tenure has been really developed. Is when I first started, I was hand entering diversion record data for about 2.5 weeks each month. And now we can do it in a matter of minutes because of technology.
Thank you, Doug. Craig Dossey is the Executive Director of the El Paso County Planning and Community Development Department. Craig, El Paso County Planning and Development is finalizing the County Water Master Plan. In fact, a public session is planned to be October 25th. Can you give us, with no spoiler alerts, a quick snapshot of the plan and how the update of the county's land use plan, which will follow, will incorporate the results of the Water Master Plan?
Thanks, Mike. Well, first, I appreciate the shameless plug. Mike is actually on our steering committee for the plan, so hopefully you know the answer to this question as much as I do. You know, Mike, it's a really exciting time to be in the county, particularly in the planning department of the county. We have two very significant efforts that you identified underway. Currently, one's coming to an end, which is the Water Master Plan. The other one is the Land Use Master Plan, which we're just now kicking off. But it's an exciting time. These are things that the county's really never done at this level. To try to put a pin on the Water Master Plan, what I would call that is really a plan looking at water as a resource, but looking at it as a resource in the context of land use. To my knowledge, there's not really another county that's done something like this. For those of you that don't know, the county doesn't provide water. However, we have 56 water providers in El Paso County, ranging all the way from Colorado Springs Utilities on down to some really small mobile home park water providers. So in doing the plan, we have to look at all these various water providers and what does the future look like for each of these water providers, and is there a future? So when we set out to do a water master plan, particularly in the planning context, we had to look at it as, you know, how can we start talking about water earlier in the planning process in terms of development? The way it works right now is water really doesn't come into the discussion until the end of the planning process at the subdivision stage. For those of you that aren't familiar with the term of art, under state statute, there's a sufficiency finding that's made either at the preliminary plan or final plat stage, but in either event, that's later in the process. So this plan is intended to try to bring water into the conversation at the higher level of planning, whether it be a sketch plan or the zoning stage. So, you know, what we've done with that is we've looked at supply and demand, not only as it sits in this snapshot in time, but ultimately what's it going to look like in the years 2040 and 2060 in various regions within the county. We've identified 8 different sub-areas within the county that not only are really based on the provision of water and where that water's, or who's providing that water, but also kind of in the future growth scenario that we look at not only in the Water Master Plan, but ultimately we're going to have to look at in the context of the Land Use Master Plan. So we're hoping that on the back end of the Water Master Plan, we're going to have recommendations for implementation, things like conservation, shared storage, hopefully delivery of additional renewable water. When I say that we have 56 water providers in the county, almost exclusively those water providers are providing water that comes out of the ground in the form of groundwater. So the equation has to change in order for these various areas of the county to have a future. If we don't start incentivizing delivery of renewable water, that finite resource that is groundwater will eventually not be there. And so what we're hoping is the Land Use Master Plan, which we're in the process of reviewing proposals for that right now, hoping to kick that off yet this year, will kind of take its lead from the Water Master Plan and use some of that data that we've mined to try to figure out where's growth likely to occur, and more importantly, are there going to be services, particularly water supply, to serve that growth. So that's where we're at, and again, the shameless plug, October 25th, we are hosting a public open house at the Regional Development Center at 2880 International Circle from 6 o'clock till 8 o'clock at night. I know Mike's going to be there and would be happy to answer any questions, as well as the rest of our steering committee, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. And by the way, the Colorado Water Plan has a tenet and a goal to reach by, I believe, 2030, it might be 2025, that 75% of all Coloradoans live in communities where the water resource planning is congruent with the land planning. So this is following what was handed to the governor 3 years ago in the Colorado Master Plan. Abby Ortega is the manager of water resources for Colorado Springs Utilities. Abby, you manage the water portfolio for Colorado Springs Utilities, which spans multiple river basins. We saw examples of some of the Trans-Mountain diversions in the film. Can you briefly explain to us, as Front Range residents, why we should be paying attention to the Colorado River system and the effects of the current drought cycle in the west and the southwest?
Thanks, Mike. As you saw in the video, we bring Trans-Mountain water in from the West Slope, and that's all Colorado River water. They talked a lot about the dependencies of that water on the recreation in the Arkansas Basin, the fishing, the economy. But not only that, what they didn't talk about as much is about 50% of the water in Colorado Springs water system comes from the West Slope, from the Colorado River. And the majority of the El Paso County residents in Fountain, Security, Widefield, Strathmore Hills also receive water from the Frying Pan, Arkansas project, which is Colorado River water, as well as many of the ag users. And when they talk about the Arkansas Valley Conduit, all of those communities really from Pueblo Reservoir downstream and some of the upper Arkansas communities will be relying on that Colorado River water. What we're seeing on the Colorado River with the drought cycle, which for us, we're looking at kind of the 2-year sort of short-term sporadic droughts, but Lake Powell inflows, which regulate Colorado's ability to divert water off of that river, are at historic lows, at least since the Colorado River Compact was signed in 1922. This year, the inflows to Lake Powell were down to 36% of normal. And so that is concerning as a state, it's concerning as a basin. We're looking at how to mitigate the effects of that drought on the levels in Lake Powell. And some of you here may think, why do we care about the levels in Lake Powell? Lake Powell's used to mitigate the flow in the Colorado River from Colorado all the way down to Mexico. It's also used to generate a lot of the power that we see across the western United States. So if Lake Powell suddenly doesn't have enough water in it to release water for electricity, not only are we starting to run out of water in our communities, but we're not able to have the electricity at the prices we're used to paying. So that certainly has huge impacts on the economy and on the Front Range. When we look at the impacts of that water that we divert from the Colorado Basin on the Front Range, because it is fully reusable and we can use that water multiple times, that's about $130,000 for every acre foot of water we divert off of the Colorado River in economic impacts. So it is very concerning for everybody across the Front Range, and we need to pay attention to that. Colorado Springs Utilities and other Front Range entities, including the Southeastern District, are heavily involved in those discussions with the other upper basins on how to mitigate the effects of the drought on Lake Powell. And so we're working together to come up with a plan to perhaps do an intentionally created surplus account in Lake Powell where we can store water in there, kind of that we can control. If we reduce our Colorado River take by maybe 20% and put that water into storage in Lake Powell, then at times where it's really low, we can release that water. And it doesn't have the impacts on the Front Range communities and the downstream ag that it might otherwise have. So we're certainly working together to mitigate that. But what's happening across the state is, of course, important to everything on the Arkansas. The rafting and the gold medal fisheries wouldn't be possible without that flow from the Colorado River and the Frying Pan Arkansas project and the ability to manage those flows between Turquoise Lake, Twin Lakes, and Pueblo Reservoir.
Thank you, Abby. Richard Skorman is the City of Colorado Springs Councilman for District 3 and President of the City Council, as well as, I believe you're still currently serving on the Fountain Creek Flood Control and Greenway District Board.
Yes.
Councilman, thank you for your participation in Fountain Creek matters, and not just for tonight. But I've been here for 12 years, and you've always been a part of that discussion. Put on your elected official / public policy hat. What is your elevator speech to constituents about why Fountain Creek is important to the city, to El Paso County, and to the state of Colorado?
Well, thank you for inviting me tonight and being a part of this. I was watching the movie and I saw people that I was working with in 2001 and 2002 when I worked for the Trust for Public Land and helped set up the Lower Arkansas Valley Water Conservancy District. We've been water warriors, I think, for at least 15 years, Larry Small and many of the people in that movie. And Fountain Creek is important because everything that we put into our sinks and everything that goes down our toilets and everything that's on our streets ends up in Fountain Creek. And you couldn't have scripted a worse place to build a city so big because of we're the only one in Colorado that doesn't have a river to absorb its runoff. So what they talked about in the movie, Bob Rollins, it was Fountain Creek was dry part of the year. That was absolutely true. And then you add the complexity of that we have highly erodible soil and big elevation drop. So not only is Fountain Creek important because of everything that washes into it and what we put into our sinks and what we put on our lawns and everything that we get from the western slope in terms of bringing water to the community, but it's also important because a huge amount of soil gets eroded into it. It's basically marine shale soil around it, it's sand. And then we have pure shale outside of it, which is marbles. But when there's a big rain event, everything gets washed down into Fountain Creek. So we have a particular responsibility to try to manage that. And what Richard was saying, and Larry knows very well, and I know myself, is that we haven't been good stewards in the past. We haven't built the city as if we were worried about what we put into Fountain Creek. In fact, there was a time where the best practice was to rush as much water as you could into Fountain Creek through these cement culverts, and who cares if it floods downstream? I know that the Arkansas River goes through 180 water treatment systems before it gets to the Gulf of Mexico. We have a particular responsibility. When you watch that slide up there, the film scene of the Fountain Creek going into the Arkansas River, it's a brown cloud going into a clear river. And so I think that we finally have gotten to the point where the citizens of Colorado Springs realize this is our responsibility. We went to the voters last November and they said yes to a $5 a month fee, and Richard and many of us on council supported it. The mayor stuck his neck out, and we finally have dedicated funding for another 20 years. And it's $460 million, and that's great, but that's not enough. In fact, studies show it's almost $1 billion problem and solution. We're doing everything that we can. Larry Small and the Watershed District and everybody in the region is trying to work on this, but we need to figure out how to fix problems that we should have fixed a long, long time ago that are a lot harder to fix. And we need to make sure that we have this. I think there's no more important responsibility as an elected official that we steward that creek and we have clean water that goes down it and we don't flood and harm our downstream neighbors.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to thank our panel, first of all, but invite any questions from the audience. If you can make it down to one of the two microphones here, please do. If you can't, I'll run a microphone up to you for any of our panelists. I'll try to direct it to the right one.
I can't go down to the microphone, so I'll try and talk loud.
Let me come on up.
in many neighborhoods, there's retention ponds that fill up after a large storm. I wonder, are these all pumped back into the river at once or sequentially to moderate it?
Thanks. I think, Rich, can you
Richard,
handle that
yeah.
one?
Yeah, I could take that. Although this is not fair, I mean, President Skorman does this all the time, so he's used to being at a diocese. I think that we are at a disadvantage of President Skorman. Almost every facility we have in the city is detention, a little bit of difference. Retention holds it forever, detention, or not forever, but holds it. Detention releases it over time. And that's kind of what I talked about in my answer. The detention facilities that we build nowadays have to release water at over a certain rate. The volume is released over 72 hours, and then there's a certain volume that has to be released in time to meet water rights under Senate Bill 212. You bring up an interesting point in that, are they timed? And the answer is no. Our city, that is a very new philosophy of how to manage stormwater, to look at a basin and time those large detention facilities to release at a certain rate. That is what we're looking at from that large infrastructure master plan study that I was talking about, is how do you not only capture that water, hold it for a certain amount of time to reduce the downstream flows, at the same time ensure that you're not hurting downstream water rights, but then time it so that the basin, so that each facility operates as a whole. And that is what our current plan is developing, is how to do that.
Thank you. Have anybody else with? Shall I run this up to you?
Thank you. Actually, two questions. One is there going to be better control of industrial wastewater going into the processed sewer water, like from Colorado Springs and the fracking in El Paso County, even though it is exempted under the Clean Water Act currently? And also, when will better regulations go into effect as far as when water and how it is approved for new construction? Because what I'm seeing is letters of sufficiency, and then the news reports say those areas actually don't have sufficient water. So these letters of sufficiency from the different water districts for some of the new projects and new areas that the county is approving on a regular basis don't seem to jive with those reports of water sufficiency for those neighborhoods in real life from those water districts. Thank you.
So we have two questions. Craig, do you think that you might be able to answer the second one?
Sure. So I think the question really centers around, and our Board of County Commissioners hears this a lot, the issue of paper water versus wet water. Paper water is, I have a right to use the water underneath my land, and I think the question really is based on groundwater probably, given development in the county. When you have paper water, you have a right, you have a decreed right to use the water underneath your property. That does not mean that water will be there. And I think that is a fundamental disconnect that oftentimes kind of rears its ugly head at this dais and at that podium. However, the authority on water, particularly on the decree of groundwater, is the state of Colorado. It's not El Paso County. So when we look at development applications in the county, we send those applications to the state engineer's office, and they are looking at it through the lens of a 100-year supply. They make a determination whether or not there's adequate water supply to serve that development for 100 years. When it comes to El Paso County, that review is done by the county attorney's office, and they do a review based on a 300-year supply. I think there's only 2 other jurisdictions in the state of Colorado that have increased that threshold from 100 to something else, El Paso County being one of them. So when there is a finding made for sufficiency of water, it's a paper water right, no question. There's a lot of debate as to what the lifespan is of the aquifers in the Denver Basin. Those of you who aren't familiar, you're sitting on top of the Denver Basin right now. We have 4 aquifers in this area. And I have yet to find somebody who can tell me exactly how long those basins are going to last. But really, and I think in my answer to my question, it's really the reason why we're going through the effort of doing a water master plan, because we all recognize and we constantly hear the issue of how long will my well last, and more importantly, I'm really referring to mom and dad who live on 5 acres. And it's that new development that usually is of a higher density that is creating an issue for those folks. So I think that maybe answers your question. The answers really are very, very challenging. And through our water master planning effort, one of the things we discussed was, is the 300-year rule still appropriate? I don't think we're going to get to an answer through that process. I think that's a much more intensive technical process of evaluating if 300 years is still appropriate, or if there's something else that could incentivize delivery of additional renewable water. Hopefully that answered your question. I think the first question with regard to fracking water as a result of oil and gas development in the county, we haven't had an oil and gas permit issued in, I don't know, maybe 5 or 8 years. So I'm not sure that's necessarily an issue currently, and I'm certainly not the expert on treating that water.
I will reluctantly step on the first question and answer that by saying that the Clean Water Act was adopted over 50 years ago, Public Law 92-500. It has been reauthorized 9 times that I can remember. The Environmental Protection Agency from the federal government is charged with, among other things, the clean water, and they have, over the course of the years, adopted a series of regulations that deal with different contaminants. Every water utility in the nation must treat for and test for 92 contaminants. And they range from total dissolved solids to nitrates to arsenic to lead, copper, you name it. There are 92 of those. There are also trace contaminants, of which I can speak to with a little bit of authority, having had to deal with it for the last 3 years. You heard the chemist from CSU speak about it's getting easier, or it's getting more and more precise to define contamination as we go forward. So what wasn't contamination before is contamination now. The EPA is in a constant series of review and adoption of new criteria for contaminants of all type. So what isn't a contaminant now may be in the future. We have experienced that with the perfluorinated compounds. That is as much a work in progress as what Rich had mentioned as some of the newer science they have for managing stormwater. So you'll see more trace contaminants. We enter a series of testing across the country that lasts 3 years. Every water utility that serves more than 10,000 people has to test for 30 different contaminants. We had to test for 30 different contaminants 6 years ago, and 6 of them were perfluorinated compounds. And guess what happened? We're dealing with it now, we're treating for it now, and we're delivering water without perfluorinated compounds now. Yes, sir. Can I run this up to you? Let me.
With our current administration, I would imagine everything EPA has done in the past that's been good is going to disappear.
Anybody want to take that one on?
I think the politicians should get that one.
Yeah. I know that's a big worry, but a lot of these are codified. And there's a lot of cases that would have to be won before many of these rules could be overturned. I know that there's a lot that at risk, but I'm not as worried about it unless maybe there's a couple terms of this presidency and a lot of changes in the courts to not allow the current regulations to happen. But it is a worry for sure.
I could actually add to that from the stormwater perspective, from a MS4, which is the permitting that the city is under. It's called a municipally separate storm sewer system permit. That's a federal permit under the Clean Water Act. The state has actually said that if the federal government lessened those MS4 standards, the state would still hold the higher standard. So I get a lot of questions from the stormwater perspective of, if the MS4 permit went away tomorrow, what would happen? Actually, nothing would happen because the state has said they would hold the same regulation. Yep. So I don't know if that helps, but I think
that makes sense as well.
Hi. First of all, great film. I really enjoyed it. Thank you. There was a scene in there where that brown water, and I think we said it's where the Fountain Creek's going into the Arkansas waters.
That's correct.
And I've heard you guys talking about moral responsibility for us not to flood the areas down there. Do we have a moral responsibility? I would hope the answer is yes, and I would hope the answer is do we have a legal responsibility to the water that we do send down there to be clean? And with the stormwater projects, is that going to make that water cleaner as it goes downstream?
I'll let Larry, you go first.
Sorry, turned off here. The water flowing between Colorado Springs and the Arkansas River is primarily polluted with sedimentation. What you see in that brown cloud at the confluence is an issue associated with sediment transport within the stream, the aggregation, degradation of that sediment load. The district has just completed dredging on behalf of the city of Pueblo. They paid us. That was some of the money that came to the district for support of one of our governments. We actually dredged the channel from 11th Street to the confluence of the Arkansas River, about almost 2 miles, 160 feet wide, 4 feet deep. We also removed vegetation along the levee and along the west bank to a distance of 20 feet from the bank to increase the floodplain capacity, which helps with the flood flows within the levee reaches. We've just completed a Highway 47 project in Pueblo that essentially is a channel management project that reduces sediment load transport from roughly the northern city limits of Pueblo down into those reaches that we had dredged. We did that in partnership with CDOT because there was some bridge abutment protections and some bank stabilization to protect the highway that they partnered with us on. And then upstream, we still have 6 more projects that we initiated this year and proposed for next year to also help start reducing that sediment load. So sediment is the biggest contaminant within Fountain Creek, and that load has to be managed. Now, Richard's doing a lot, and I'll let him talk about what he's doing. That also reduces that load into the creek as well as pollutants. He has more with his detention facilities, more control over pollutants. We have in the district a water quality program that we're trying to figure out how we implement. Contaminations in Fountain Creek between Colorado Springs and Pueblo primarily comes from agriculture and stabling. That's the bulk of it. There's some phosphorus content that's added from the soils that are eroding in that reach. And E. coli and selenium are the 2 that are not within containment as determined by Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, which takes a much broader program to start controlling, and an organization called AppCure is studying that now to find out where the non-point sources of E. coli are so that we can start dealing with those non-point sources. The point sources are regulated. That's Colorado Springs Utilities wastewater treatment plant, for instance. That's regulated, so there are no non-point releases. All these are in compliance. So our big issue is called, or those are point sources. Non-point sources are coming from places we don't know where they are and can't find, but those are the two big issues. But Richard?
Well, Larry really covered that, but I'll just add that the city of Colorado Springs, about $100 million, probably a little bit more, of the projects that are on our list, our channel stabilization projects throughout the city, mainly in Sand Creek, Cottonwood Creek. Those have been historically studied to be large contributors to sediment, basically through unstable channels, channel degradation. I'll just give you an example just so you can get an idea of the scope of the problem. We just are completing a channel stabilization at Platte, where Sand Creek goes under Platte. There's the swap meets over there. That channel, there's a large drop structure. Some of you may remember several years ago we almost lost Platte Bridge. They filled that back in and everything was fine. In about 9 years, I think, it dropped close to 30 feet. So that channel dropped 30 feet and was 150 feet wide, 100 feet wide, 150 feet wide. So we've stabilized that. We have lots of that. So that's our, channel stabilization is a huge role, and that will decrease a lot of that sediment. The only other thing I'll add is when Larry talked about E. coli, that's a large issue, and obviously that's been addressed, and I think most of you guys know some of those strategies there, but that's a holistic strategy, and we are participating in the AFCure, the city is, to look at non-point source and trying to figure out where those are so that we can implement other strategies to help address that. So hopefully that answers.
Thank you. Roy, do you want me to bring you the microphone? No, okay.
First of all, thank you so much for being here, and great film. Really enjoyed it. Despite the issues with climate change, the Colorado River issues, drought, and so forth, I think we as a community have one of the best, most reliable, cleanest, safest water supplies anywhere you could find. And that's due to the efforts of Colorado Springs Utilities, Abby, you and your group, your predecessors, Mr. Skorman, Mr. Small. That was fabulous work, but not everybody in the lower Arkansas is as fortunate. The film talked about the Arkansas Valley Conduit, and I guess my question is, what can we do as a community to promote and support that project so that the folks in the lower Arkansas have the same safe, clean, reliable supply that we enjoy?
I can take a stab at it.
I could take a little bit of that. We can use the Pueblo Reservoir for if and when storage, because what Southeastern makes off of if and when storage goes towards the lower Ark conduit.
And I think, Roy, El Paso County has 5 representatives on the Southeast District Board, and that's really where we offer our support. They're working with the legislation to attempt to get funding for that. I think there are some phases of that will be moving forward as early as 2020. And so as a county, we absolutely support that project. We'll continue to work with them in any way that they need us to, but really they're going to tie on to Pueblo Board's distribution system here coming up and start to bring that pipeline in phases through the communities there in the lower Arkansas.
Any other questions from anyone else? I'll run this up.
Thank you. My name's Ben. Great movie. I love fishing down in Pueblo. I'm sorry you had to show everybody that. Now they're all going to show up. Mess it up. I was just wondering about the fishing. here in the creek in Colorado. It is kind of dirty water, but there's fish there. And then the phytochemicals, the phyto plants, perhaps cattails or whatever, could help filter it, make it a fishery here, and promote that and getting awareness. And then just a pop, because Colorado is the microbrew state, have a community brew, Colorado Springs sponsored brewery, and use the money to help with all these water projects.
Larry, would you be the bartender?
Well, for one thing, Creek Week, if you look at what we have a Brewshed Alliance that is supporting Creek Week, so the breweries are working with us in that sense because probably 90% of their product is water, and they realize that if we don't do things to keep clean water, we're going to be selling dirty beer. And that's probably not a good marketing strategy. As far as the fish, there have been a limited amount of trout found at the confluence of Upper Fountain Creek and Monument Creek where they come together, and it's actually confluence with Monument Creek and Fountain Creek. Upper Fountain Creek has a fairly good trout population around Green Mountain Falls, and then from there it gets fairly sparse. There are some trout in Manitou Springs. As you go below that confluence, it gets less and less, but studies have been done that says that if we can control the flood flows, reestablish the wetlands, which are very important, you mentioned those, and provide a habitat for the fish, you can have trout fishing all the way down to the racetrack. So there is a potential to do that. It's just a matter of managing the stream, reinstituting the wetlands that we've lost from the floods. We've lost probably 70% of our wetlands on Fountain Creek from the erosion from the floods. So part of the district's mission is to restore those wetlands, and our projects involve doing that. We did that at Highway 47, where we did a huge, massive revegetation effort to reestablish the wetlands in that reach, and we'll continue doing that up the creek. But yes, sport fishing can be viable as far as the racetrack if we properly manage the stream and control the sedimentation erosion and reestablish the wetlands.
And that's really what is the best practice, isn't it, Richard? And so a lot of how we're talking about detaining water is to build wetlands, to spill it over so it filters back in. But I think the non-point pollution is going to be a big factor. What I love is when I go up to Denver by the REI building and I see people in the Cherry Creek and the Platte River in inner tubes, and that was always Senator Salazar's dream. He thought that instead of turning our backs to Fountain Creek, we should embrace it. And there's many people, including with the Greenway Fund now, that are just trying to figure out how to get people to use it as a recreational source. And I think another factor in all that is how we create a system of greenways. And that's part of what we talk about at the Fountain Creek Flood Control, Watershed Flood Control and Greenway District. But hopefully that all these things will connect together, and we'll be able to work with stormwater to maybe realize your dream. It might not be next year, but maybe 5 or 10 years, it may be possible.
Thank you all. Okay.
What about Monument Valley Creek? Why is that water grayish white, and why does it stink so much, and is there any efforts to clean that one up?
The district did a study, a flood restoration master plan for Monument Creek from the headwaters of Monument Creek in Palmer Lake all the way to the confluence with Fountain Creek. We identified areas of erosion. We identified areas where wetlands have been depleted, where tributaries need to be managed like Monument Creek. Richard's done part of that. I've heard those complaints about Monument Creek primarily in the area of the University Park Shopping Center. That's where it is. We haven't determined what causes that. CSU has done some channel management projects in that reach to help control the flows and keep the water moving properly. That's part of the problem you have, is if you allow the water to not flow properly, maintain a proper velocity through that reach, it'll stagnate in certain areas. But yes, I have heard about that, but I haven't found what the specific cause is for that reach.
Anybody else?
Well, there's a fair amount of septic systems in the northern part of the county, isn't there?
Yes.
I don't know if that's something that could be a factor as well. You know, Colorado Springs Utilities isn't discharging there. You know, they're discharging at Las Vegas. And so I don't think that we're the culprit for that at all. But,
Yeah, I'll just add that we are continuing to look at that basin and build on the study that Larry is talking about, to keep looking at that. I mean, I think Larry is really right. I mean, it's a flow management issue in that area, which is, and then it's also just it's the stream stability. There's large areas, especially on the lower, middle, and the lower parts of the Air Force Academy, that have severe degradation. So I think that's part of it. So we are looking at that and continue to look at it. So
Can I ask another?
I don't have a great answer other than we are looking at it. So.
Sure.
What impact has the marijuana growers had on our water supply? Are they using up a lot of water? Because I understand they're taking over some farmlands and orchards, like down in Canyon.
Doug, do you want to hit on that? One of his
I can touch on it a
colleagues
little
has
bit.
been involved with that.
Yeah, so some of the areas in my, I guess my area of responsibility, Pueblo County, there are a lot of marijuana grow operations that are legal, and there are a lot that are illegal. The ones that are legal are using a lot less water than would be anticipated, because once a marijuana grow operator gets the water to a point where it's perfect for their plant, they don't want to discharge it. They end up trying to recycle it. So as part of the Division of Water Resources, we're finding that most operators aren't using as much water as they could be, because, like I said, the nutrients is what the plants need. Now, some of the illegal ones, I don't know. We try to find them as best we can, but realistically, the sheriff's office are the ones that do most of the enforcement on those. But it really depends on the source of water and how much they have to treat it to make the plants, make it good for the plants.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, if there aren't any more questions, I think that we owe these 6 people a really big round of applause. Thank you on behalf of everybody that is represented here for coming out and for being interested in water. We really appreciate that. Thanks.